The amazing Daniel Schwabauer could not make it, so I am here instead. I'm sorry why you're here instead of in one of the other sessions. I don't know, but I'll do my best. I'm going to start out with a story. Surprisingly, shockingly, one of my favorite stories from the ancient world comes from the 8th century in Persia somewhere, about a little boy in a little town, a poor boy, poor town, who is allowed on weekends to go into the city, the village, the local village, and partake of the wonders of the market. He doesn't have the money to buy anything, but he can see the stuff in the market, the beautiful fabrics, the wonderful, delicious smelling food that he can't afford to buy, sometimes even the elegant pottery with its fancy glazing, etc. And of course he can't afford any of this, but it's way more interesting than doing chores, and like every child down through history, he has to do his chores first before he can go. One day, when he's allowed to go, his chores take him longer than usual, and he arrives late. To his horror, he sees that he has missed a traveling magician's show. That traveling magician is just wrapping things up, and of course this kid comes and he's like standing, all the adults are around, gathered around, he's looking through, trying to catch a glimpse of what's happening, and the magician says, "Thank you very much for my last act. I'm going to do something for the children here." But he's come too late for that because the magician has already gathered the little handful of children, and he holds up his finger in the air and his finger starts to glow. And then he reaches down and he touches the 6 pebbles that he has arranged, and he holds each one of them for the space of 2 breaths. And as he's touching his glowing finger to the pebble, it turns to solid gold. He does that for each of the pebbles. He hands the pebbles to the children. The crowd applauds. And he says, "Thank you very much." And he starts putting his things away, and the crowd disperses. And the magician, sensing that someone is still there, turns around, and there's this boy that was not in the front. And he says, "You came too late to the show, didn't you?" And the boy's like, "Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, I did." He says, "Okay." He pulls out another pebble, holds up his finger until it glows, touches the pebble for the space of 2 breaths until it turns gold, and he hands it to the boy. And the boy says, "Thank you, sir, but what? But I want more." "You want more?" It's a little bold. "All right, look, there's a stick over there. Grab me that stick." The boy runs, grabs the stick, brings it back. He holds up his finger until it glows. He touches the stick, this time for about 30 seconds. The whole stick, about this long, turns to gold. He presents it to the boy, and the boy says, "Oh, sir, thank you, but..." And he says, "But what?" And he says, "But I want more." "All right, look, there's a crumbling wall over there. Grab me one of those bricks and bring me the whole brick." So the boy brings in the brick. He holds up his finger till it glows. He touches the brick, this time for about 3 minutes. And the boy watches in wonder as the entire brick turns to solid gold. He gives the brick to the boy, which is very, very heavy. And he says, "Now listen, don't be an idiot and squander this on something. Take this back to your family. It will feed them for a year." And the boy says, "Oh, thank you, sir, but..." And he says, "But what?" "But I want more." "What more? I gave you a gold pebble, a gold stick, a gold brick. What more could you possibly want?" And the boy says, "Sir, I want the magic finger." That to me is a story about storytelling. Because you can be satisfied with the gold of a wonderful story, or you can say, "I want to know how to make a story gold." And I'm not claiming to be the magician in that story, by the way. That's not the metaphor. It's me looking out and saying, I think I see people who are saying, "Sir, I want more. I want to know how to make a story that's gold." Compelling films are more than just narratives about interesting events. They're more than that. They work via a process that mirrors human reactions to conflict. So in this session, I'm going to try to unpack 2 basic types of scenes and the elements that drive them, because if you can understand the principle of what drives scenes from the level of scenic conflict, you can instantly, it takes this one thing alone, not instantly, this one simple thing can transform your screenplays. It won't necessarily make them perfect, but it will make them readable. It will make them interesting, right? You can watch, anybody here ever watch YouTube and you see something that comes on, it just has interesting clips from movies? Anybody else done that? Probably bad habit, where you're like, you've seen the movies before, and the action clips come on or whatever. They're usually that's because the scenes work as scenes. And so you can get kind of a little bit of that gold out of the scene, right? So Let me back up a little bit and say that in the session this morning, I said that stories have to entertain first. This is another way of saying stories have to create emotion. A story that doesn't create emotion in the audience will be boring. Boredom is the lack of emotion. So the first goal of every story is to create emotion in the audience. That's the first goal. A story that doesn't do that is failing its purpose as a story and will not work on any other level. So it's possible to tell a story that is only emotive and is not meaningful. Television does this all the time. No offense to anybody in here who works in television. We have a lot of stories in Hollywood and on TV that are sort of like junk food for the brain. It's not bad necessarily to tell a story that's only entertaining. It's just the entry level to be a story. So why emotion first? And psychologists will tell us that it's because the emotion is the low road, not the high road. And by that, what they mean is that emotion is actually the most direct path in. We respond to things emotionally first. Because emotion, even though it's not always telling the truth, is always honest about what we think about reality. When I cry, it's because I think something really is sad. I might be wrong. Something that makes me angry, maybe I should not be. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but it's because my emotions are honestly telling me this is what I think about it. So story at the very level, the first level is it's got to create emotion. Stories are meaningful. Good stories are meaningful. They're also moral. They work with a moral scale that is absolute. This is one reason why I reject the idea of story as a Darwinian mechanism. I'm not saying it can never serve any kind of purpose like that, but I'm saying its main purpose is always turned on some kind of moral compass. And it's not the compass from Pirates of the Caribbean that points to what you want. It's a compass that points to an absolute. And that's why story works. You cannot tell a story to an audience that does not share your moral compass because they won't understand your story. They won't get it. They'll think the hero that you're telling them about is the villain. So, good stories try to prove their own premise wrong through conflict. And there are three types of conflict. You can break this down 1,000 different ways. Again, when I give these sessions, I am not claiming to have the absolute 10 commandments of storytelling given from on high or anything like that. I'm trying to present a way of looking at story that makes it digestible and understandable and doable. The language of story is very subtle, but it can be understood in these patterns. So if you've ever been in a high school English class, you probably encountered some form of the first one, the level of story. So a whole novel or a whole film is going to have some basic man versus man, which is really person versus person. It just sounds awkward. Person versus person. Man versus nature, or man versus himself. It's going to come from one of those three places. And you can figure out what it is by just saying, how is the conflict resolved at the end? So I'm not going to talk about this anymore in this session here because I'm going to focus on the second one, which is the level of a scene. And I'm going to define this here in a minute a little bit more. But basically what you need to create a scene, the way I mean it, is you need to change some kind of value. You need to flip it from positive to negative or negative to positive. So the character starts out free before he tries to sneak into the enemy castle and get the secret map. And in the process of sneaking into the castle to get the secret map, he is captured. End of scene. Why? Because he went from free to imprisoned. I put this in my notes, so I'll say it. It's not meant as a joke, and I just realized it could be single to married. It could be married to single. I'm happily married. This is not the Ring of Doom. My wife is awesome. But you could have a scene that was positive to negative around a wedding. Have you ever seen The Princess Bride? Just say man and wife. Man and wife. He didn't come. You remember that scene? It's a disaster scene, right? It goes from positive to negative because of the change of values. We think Buttercup is married. You could go from employed to jobless. You could even have a scene that went from jobless to employed, where we in the audience are thinking, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, and you accept the job. And we go, ugh, because we see what's coming and the character doesn't. One way to think about this is who wins the sword fight? That's what this scene is about. Who wins or who loses? And there's another level of conflict. That's the momentary conflicts. They're little tiny choices or bad things that happen within a scene, but they don't make the scene flip from positive to negative or negative to positive. So they are the thrust and the parry of the sword fight. They add dramatic tension, they're interesting, but they're not, they don't push the story forward in the same way. They're only there to develop the scene. So obviously I'm talking about conflict, and I want to zoom in on the scene because the fastest way to make a story more compelling is to build every scene around a clear conflict of story patterns that mirror human experience. And the simplest way that I've found to convey the idea that I'm trying to get across is to say, think in disasters and dilemmas. Every scene is a disaster or a dilemma. Every scene. Now, when I say scene, I'm not necessarily talking about something shot in one location. So before I get to that, let me just say why. Why do I focus on scenes? It's because if you can write great scenes, your story will still feel meaningful and engaging. But if you only create momentary conflicts that don't add up to anything, we will soon get to the point where we don't care. And if I have time, I'll unpack that a little bit at the end of this. You can also have a great theme without a compelling scene. Anybody seen any French films from the 1970s? There's some great thematic things. Like, why did you take 6 hours? Why? What was going on here? Okay, so what I think you were here for is a feature film looking something like this. Okay, what you see on the screen is, it's not every film, it's not the only way a film can be done, but it is a sort of ubiquitous pattern where you have Act 1 being about 25% of the film, Act 3 being about 25% of the film, and then the middle section being about 50%. And there are sections which Sean Gaffney did a fantastic job yesterday, and you should listen to that session if you were not there. He did a fantastic job of unpacking these. I put this up so I could show you this is what I mean. This is like a section of a long-form story that pushes the narrative forward through a change of values created through its action. If you own a DVD, anybody still own DVDs around here? The jacket flaps, they have scene lists, right? So most of those are going to have 24 to 28. Sometimes it's more or less, but they're going to have somewhere in there. And one reason why is because of this: 25%, 50%, 25%. So what it's showing you is not always a perfect correlation with what I mean, but it's close enough that it makes the point. Values being changed from positive to negative or negative to positive. A thing that's a unit that's pushing the story forward. An act can be defined as a group of scenes that change the protagonist's relationship to the story goal. The thing that you want by the end of the film is going to change at the end of Act 1, and it's going to change again at the end of Act 2. What changes at the end of Act 1? Typically, not always, but typically, so you have a hero who is either reluctant. Frodo Baggins is reluctant to go on this quest. He doesn't destroy ancient, horrible rings for fun, right? Indiana Jones, on the other hand, for fun, he goes and he raids temple, and so when he's like, I get to go search for the lost Ark of the Covenant, he is excited, right? So you have an eager hero and you have a reluctant hero. So how are they different? Well, they become the same in a sense, in that at the end of Act 1, often what changes is they're pursuing the story goal. That's the determination to pursue it at any cost. It's no longer for fun. It's now, oh, my life's on the line. My country's on the line. My friends are on the line. That changes again at the end of Act 2 often, when the character who has said, I will pursue this story goal at any cost, finds out what that cost really looks like. Sometimes it's called the dark night of the soul. Sometimes it's called the black moment. It's bad. And it needs to be worse, usually, than the thing we thought was coming. Because if the price is not high enough, the story goal will not feel important. The suffering your characters undergo determines the value of the story goal. Suffering is the only currency you have as a storyteller. It's the only thing you have. And our tendency as sympathetic people, writers tend to be sympathetic people, I think. Our tendency is to let our characters off too easily. You have to learn to torture them to some degree in believable ways. J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter books, when her last book came out, I saw an interview with her. It was on like 60 Minutes or 2020 or something like that. The interviewer said, if you could meet your main character, what would you say to him? And she said, I'd tell him I'm sorry for everything that I put him through. Now that is one of the many reasons why that series was so successful. She knew that she needed to make it worse for him than she wanted it to be, and she carried around enough sort of guilt, in a sense, so that she was able to say very easily and quickly, I'd tell him I'm sorry. She felt that as a writer. You should be feeling it. If you're not feeling it, if you're not saying, I can't do that to him, can I? I can't do that. If that doesn't make you go, then it's probably not enough. If you ever watched a movie that felt too easy, it was because the characters did not suffer enough in pursuit of the story goal. Okay. Here's an example, Titanic. I have not seen Titanic, I think, in 20 years or so. It's been quite a while. It was the first DVD that was at my hand when I was creating the slide, so I just opened it up and threw it in here. These are the scene list from the jacket flap. Can I get a show of hands? Have you seen Titanic? If I mention this, okay. I mean, you would think it would be fairly well known. And I actually don't remember when I wrote this down. Is it Logos or Logos? I mean, because it includes the scene. When you put the DVD in, it actually includes the opening credits. Anyway, what we have here is what it seems to be 3 acts with some scenes that I have highlighted. And I'm just going to point out the title of the last scene in Act 1 is You Jump, I Jump. Jumping into what? Adventure, something new, a relationship. And guess what it's also doing? It's jumping into the next act of the story. This is the momentous decision, no matter what the cost, right? Jump into the next act. What happens right in the middle of this movie? You hit an iceberg. Iceberg right ahead. What's this movie about? It's about, it's 2 people who fall in love on a... Wait, it's not about hitting an iceberg? It's about hitting an iceberg, but that happens halfway into the film, right? And then we get Your Money Can't Save You, and at the end, the promise, which you guys, if you've seen the movie, you know, right? Right? So you are going to need to do this 24 to 32 times in a feature film, probably. You're going to have to understand what is changing dramatically from positive to negative or negative to positive. It's probably going to look something like this. It's defining what a scene is. What changes? Are they going from free to imprisoned, employed to jobless, ignorant to informed? What's changing? And each of those units is going to be made up of 3 distinct sections that the audience should not recognize as 3 distinct sections at all. And the reason it's 3 distinct sections is because this is how we as humans react, either to great adversity or a terrible decision made under pressure. The opening, which could be longer or shorter than the third that I've put on here, is either going to be a plan in motion or it's going to be an emotional reaction to something terrible. The middle section is going to increase tension by casting doubt about the plan that's in motion, or it's going to be the characters shifting from their emotional reaction to something terrible to a more analytical, this is how we process things. It's emotion first and then reason. Emotion is the low road. Remember I said stories, they try to hit us emotionally first. Then it's analysis. So when your characters are reacting to something, they should be reacting emotionally first and then analytically. I've seen some films that don't work because the characters are instantly in reaction mode. They're instantly in analysis mode, in planning mode. What do we do? Dude, your friend just got his legs lopped off. And you're like planning the mission now? Think about this as a human being, right? It needs to feel human. And then at the end of the story, or at the end of the scene, you're going to have, oh, the thing we planned that we were worried wouldn't work. Guess what? It didn't work. It failed. Or we realize that we only have one of two choices, and both choices are bad. Both of them are bad. So I like to think of scenes as the moment, as everything in a scene is focused on getting you to the moment when a stick breaks. I have these old trees in my backyard, and they're constantly throwing off like what seem to be dead limbs until I pick them up and try to break them over my knee and have to go to the chiropractor. It's like, and if you take it, I'm almost 58, and I can't do the stuff I used to be able to do. Like, I know that sounds lame, but some of the limbs, I'm like, I can do that. I can't do that. Nope, I'm going to get a tool. You learn after a while. Those sticks, some of them, the greener they are, they'll resist more, right? And then there's this snap moment, right? That's what should be happening in every one of your scenes. There should be a moment that something snaps. It feels like it's broken. And as a result of this, what happens? You thought your character was closer to the story goal, and what happens? They seem to be farther away. You know what that does? That makes us go, now how are they going to do it? How in the world are they going to do that? So the difficulty of great art is that you have to, by a series of scenes in which your characters seem to be moving farther and farther away from the story goal, somehow they end up facing it and resolving it in some kind of unexpected way. In fact, one of the great things that you're trying to do in your film is you're trying to get people to internally think, I should have seen that coming, but I didn't. Because I should have seen that coming, but I didn't, means that you planted the seeds and you showed us the solution, and it was right out there in front of them, but we couldn't see it. And that will help add to the sense of revelation that comes from this pattern that you're putting together. So think of it this way. A disaster is something that stops your hero from getting what he or she wants. Thus, he or she seems to be farther from the story goal. It does not necessarily mean 911. It can mean failing a test in 6th grade. A dilemma is a choice between two negatives that allows the audience to process disasters well and in a human way, and it explores the internal nature or the flaw of a character. So this is important. A real dilemma is not a choice between a positive and a negative, because if I see that you're presented with the option of getting a poke in the eye with a pointy stick or eating a bowl of chocolate ice cream, there's no tension, right? Eat the ice cream. Eat the ice cream. That's not a dilemma, right? And similarly, if I see that you are offered with the opportunity, do you want chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? I do not care. I'm just jealous that you get the ice cream and I do not. I might even be resentful that you get the ice cream and I do not. However, if we say, okay, here's the situation. You're watching your husband and 8-year-old son get loaded onto the back of a train car to be taken off to a Nazi concentration camp. That's the situation. What do you do? If you've ever seen Life is Beautiful, that's what happens with Guido Orifice's wife. She sees that happening. It's horrifying. You feel the horror of the moment. And she says, let me on that train. That's art. Showing us there is no good option, right? But you know what that option shows us? When she says, let me on that train. And then she's presented an escape route. The German officer says, go home, Fraulein. Go home. And she says, stop that train. We actually discover more in those two lines about that one character than we have really seen through all the other lines. It's not the other lines are bad. They're funny. They're necessary. But here's the power of the dilemma. The dilemma shows us what's inside someone. We can't know, especially in a medium like this where you have visual and audio clues. We can't know what's in a person until we see them making a terrible choice under pressure. This is how we know what's inside someone's heart when they make a terrible choice under pressure. It's why I think that people who are combat veterans get so close to the people around them. I interviewed a guy a number of years ago, and he told me this story about, he was in World War II, and they were running across a field, and the Germans had, some of you will know that when they were trying to take France, there were all these hedgerows, and the Germans would put machine guns in each corner, and they would zero in the mortar shells. They knew where the mortars were going to come, so they would wait till people were in the field, and then they would just open up with everything on them. And that's what had happened to him. And he and his best friend that had been through everything together jumped into this kind of crater that created a little bit of safety. And his friend got up to keep running, and he said, the Lord told him, stay down. Stay down. His friend took 2 steps and was hit by the next mortar, and it blew him in half. That's the story. And he said, why him? Why not me? Why him? Why not me? I don't have an answer to that. No answer to that, right? But it's a human thing. They had seen each other make terrible decisions under pressure so much. And you can see, I think you see this with people who have been parted for a long time, but they come back and they go, it's like, you haven't seen each other in 30 years, and all of a sudden you're best friends again. You found out what was in their heart. That's the power of a dilemma. It shows us what's in the heart. There isn't a good answer, so which one do you take? Either one will tell us who you are as a person. All right, so a scene is a series of actions that cause and culminate in a significant change of values. And that change happens at the turning point of the scene, the breaking of the stick. One does not simply write down a bunch of stuff and call it a scene, to quote Boromir. I think that's what he said. Because it won't work. So here's the conflict patterns laid out for you as conflict patterns. They're the syntax of the language of story. I'm going to use some references from Lord of the Rings. Am I okay using references to Lord of the Rings? I love those. I reread those again for the first time, and I read them first when I was in 6th grade. Like many people, I'm unashamed to say this. When I came to the end, I cried because there was no more Middle Earth to explore. And, I was like, what do I do now? Life is over. What can I possibly do now? So I had not read them in, I think, 20 years, and I reread them last May, and I read them in 10 days, 770,000 words. I had the luxury of doing that because I teach at a college, and so I had a little bit of space between that and the next thing I was doing, and I went, you know what, I think my soul needs to be refreshed by Tolkien's prose and his mythical joy and worldview, and it was so immersive, it was so wonderful. But I won't be able to probably do that again for another 20 years. Not because of time, but because if I try to taste that sort of thing too much, the effect will not work on me. You have to just let it be the thing that it is long enough, I guess. So let me use some scenes from Lord of the Rings. The Council of Elrond. You guys, can you picture the Council of Elrond in your mind? Yeah. We get this moment where Boromir says, one does not simply walk into Mordor, right? There's the great eye, there's the poisonous air, there's the thousands of orcs around it, right? You couldn't do this with an army. There's no way. And he's reacting, of course, to the line from Elrond, which is, the ring cannot be destroyed by any power we here possess. It must be taken deep into Mordor and cast back in the fiery chasm from whence it came. One of you must do this. That's the story goal for the whole series, by the way. The entire 770,000 word book, the entire thing is encapsulated in that line. The ring must be taken deep into Mordor and cast back into the fiery chasm from whence it came. One of you must do this. Which actually this is a little bit of an aside, that statement creates in your mind a picture, right? The best story goals are single photographable acts. Because you're creating expectation in the audience that Frodo is going to walk up to the cavern, the chasm of... I always feel weird taking my wedding ring off to use it as the symbol of I have a wonderful marriage. My wife and I get along great. I love her. But we expect Frodo to walk up with a ring and do this, right? That's the idea. Is that what happens? What happens, spoiler alert, he walks up to the edge of the volcano and he says, "The ring is mine." The ring gets him at the last possible moment. What makes Frodo a hero is not his ability to fight. He doesn't have an ability to fight. It's not his magical abilities. He doesn't have any magical abilities. It's not his great stature or his noble blood. He is not noble in that way. What makes Frodo the hero of the story unexpectedly is that he is resistant to evil. He is not easily tempted. But what Tolkien is showing us is that the evil, like at some point we all give in. Even Frodo, we give in. He's also showing us something remarkable in that Tolkien is not saying what most of Hollywood is telling us, which is that good is the answer to evil. Good destroys evil. I actually think the Bible undercuts that if you read it carefully and thoughtfully. Evil destroys itself. That's the nature of evil, right? What happens to the ring? Does it end up in the volcano? Because of Gollum. Gollum's greed and betrayal result in the destruction of evil and the salvation, in an odd twist, of Frodo himself. So somebody's going to have to go, and we actually know it's going to cost him, he's going to have to die in a sense, right? It's going to cost him. One of you is going to have to die. And what happens? It turns into a big argument, right? In the Council of Elrond, there's a big argument. And we see the group of elves, dwarves, and men bickering around the reflected light of the ring. And we hear Sauron's voice in the language of Mordor going, "Shum bum, shum god, all that kind of weird stuff, right? What happens next? Frodo says, "I will take it. I will take the ring, though I do not know the way." That is a dilemma scene. What is happening? They are reacting emotionally and then analytically, and then there comes a point at which it appears the entire fellowship is going to be ruined by the power of the ring that they can't destroy. And what happens? One person makes a terrible choice. He's already been stabbed with a Morgul blade, just bringing it to Rivendell, and now we're going to send this hobbit back into the... Boromir warned us about all the stuff that could happen, and now we're going to send a hobbit back with it? He knows what he's facing, and he makes the decision. Can I let my friends be destroyed by the ring and let all of Middle-earth be destroyed by the ring, or will I let it destroy me? I'll take it. I'll take it. That's a dilemma scene. The entire thing is built around a dilemma. In the pass of, is it Caladris? I can't remember. The mountain, it's when Saruman is shooting down, all the snow is coming, and you remember, if you've seen the movie version, as they're trying to get through, they just can't make it. And Boromir is saying the hobbits are never going to make it. The halflings will never make it through, right? And Gandalf's like resistant to Gimli saying, "Hey, my uncle would give us a royal welcome. All we got to do is go through the mines of Moria." And Gandalf's like, "There's a big demon there. I happen to know this. Don't want to tell you guys this, but nope, I'm not going there." And then he says, "What? Let the ring bearer decide." What do? They go through Moria. And what happens when you give us a promise like, "I would not go there unless I had no other choice"? Is it going to be good? I call these dreadful promises. Great storytellers will promise a monster around the corner and then shock us with how bad the monster is when we get there. Now, the monster is metaphorical. I don't mean that all stories have to have a monster in them. I mean that when Gandalf says, "I would not go there unless I had no other choice," you better not just be facing extra goblins or even a cave troll, because you have Gandalf, right? You need something bigger. You need something big enough that Gandalf goes, "This foe is beyond any of you, run." You see Gandalf terrified, and we go, "Oh no, if Gandalf is terrified, I'm really scared about what's going to happen right now." But what I know from watching other stories is that nobody important is going to die, right? What happens next? One of my favorite scenes in all of cinema. I love the way they portrayed this. Gandalf on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, standing there with, I'm kind of a nerd about some of these things, but Gandalf actually has one of the rings of power, right? It's the one that's like, he's a servant of the secret fire, the Flame of Anor, I think. Is that what it's called? Flame of Anwin? I can't remember the name. The Elvish, it was last May, I can't remember. The lore behind it. But he's got, and it's one of the reasons he knows, you can't give me the ring, it'll betray me and it'll be too much power. But he says, you shall not pass, right? And then he's right. The Balrog shall not pass. So what kind of scene is this? It's a disaster. Fly, you fools. And then what happens right after the disaster? What the filmmakers, the film version, slow down everything, right? Shink, shink, shink. No. Emotional reactions. Emotional reactions that take a long time to develop, even when they're outside. And Aragorn says, get them up. These hills will be crawling with orcs when the sun goes down. And he says, for pity's sake, give them a moment, right? It's emotion. We have to feel this. If we'd just gone on after Gandalf, we'd have gone, what in the world? He must be fine. No. We need that emotional reaction. So we get an emotional reaction, and then we get a plan, and then we get the Mirror of Galadriel, which is what kind of scene? A dilemma. You offer it to me freely. Instead of a dark lord, you would have a dark queen. Right? Is this making sense? Okay. The turning points. The turning point is the moment something goes wrong or someone makes a terrible choice, and everything in the scene is building up to that moment, the breaking of a stick. You're going to break 24 to 32 sticks. And there's principles involved in this. I don't know that it's a formula. I think it's very unwise to try to follow a dilemma with a dilemma unless they're separate characters and separate arcs, because the idea behind a dilemma is you make a terrible choice, and if you make a terrible choice, and then you're faced with another terrible choice, you never got the consequences of that choice. We need to see the disaster that comes as a result of you choosing the bad thing, right? So there needs to be something along those lines. You can, however, put one disaster after another, and I can say this because I'm almost 58 years old. Sometimes life hands you disasters one after another, right? When sorrows come, they come not single spies, but in battalions, Shakespeare said. So we can see disaster and disaster. The problem with doing too many disasters in a row is that they can lose their effect, right? You can become numb to one bad thing happening after another, which is why when a bad thing like losing Gandalf happens, you really need the emotional reaction, bridge of the dilemma to happen after it, because it gives you space. It lets your story do this breath thing where it's in and out and in and out, and it prepares us emotionally for the next disaster, even though we don't know that's what we're being prepared for. So your scene starts out with the hero captured, and it ends with him having escaped, right? Because you're not just having a disaster or a dilemma, you're having a disaster or a dilemma that produces this reversal of values. It will be boring if he just climbs out a window. Something has to break for him to get out that window, or get out of that prison or whatever. Or he's going to escape because of a disaster. Maybe he gives up an important secret in the process. And instead of feeling relief at him escaping, we feel dread because that didn't go the way it was supposed to. Hunger Games. Anybody read the Hunger Games books or watched the movies? You're like, I have mixed emotions about those. The tension in those is phenomenal. And I think the movies did a fairly good job of doing things. I actually think the second movie is better than the second book. And I think there were things that if I were working on that story, I would make different choices because of my worldview. But the opening of the first book and of the first movie is really effective in this regard. Katniss Everdeen is trying to save her family from starvation, and so she's entering her name in these lists for the choice of who's going to come from their district for the Hunger Games, right? We know the Hunger Games are bad. We don't want the Hunger Games. We also know starvation is bad. We don't want starvation either. So she's entered her name again for extra rations, and now her name is in the bag or the pot for being chosen 17 times, I think, or more. Is that right? 17 times? Something like that. And this is the first year that her sister is in there, but she's like, you don't have we got to worry about me, but it's not as bad as Gale, isn't it? Gale, didn't he have like 29 or something? He got a ton of them in there. But we're mostly worried about Katniss, I think. And so what we're worried about is that her name's going to be chosen, and we know she's the protagonist, and we know the book is called what? So probably she's going into the Hunger Games, yeah? So there's this expectation. How do the filmmakers flip that expectation? Well, through a disaster and a dilemma. They draw the name out, and it is it Katniss's? No, it's not. Whose is it? Prim's. That is a disaster. And it's followed by a dilemma. What does she do? We're watching her. In the book, it's super effective in the book. And super effective in the movie, too. But the book takes enough time to process her mental anguish over, this can't be happening. I can't believe this is happening. What is going on? Her 13-year-old sister is being dragged off by district cops to the Hunger Games. And you feel that grow in the narrative, and I think you feel it in the movie, too. No, not that. We thought it was Katniss, who at least knows how to hunt, and we think maybe she could survive there. Primrose is not going to survive. What does Katniss do? I volunteer as tribute. I volunteer. Her choice, watch her sister go to certain death or enter the Hunger Games in her place. That is what makes that scene, those two scenes jammed together, that section, so stinking powerful. And the author actually breaks them apart into two separate chapters. Good turning points flow naturally from the actions and the characters of the story, and that means the solutions to plot problems usually lie within the nature of the characters themselves. It is very tempting to try to help your characters out of their situation by giving them plot armor or relying on a Deus Ex Machina ending, that God from the machine, where you as the author are rescuing them by sending in a squad of Marines or a rescue helicopter or a principal who overhears the conversation or something along those lines. And this is almost always the wrong thing to do unless you're telling a fairy tale that is extremely short and the point is sometimes you need to be rescued. In long form, you don't want to do the Deus Ex Machina thing, and here's why. If you heard me talk about studying science fiction with Jim Gunn at Kansas University, one of the things he told me was the character must always be the method of his own salvation. As a new Christian, I thought, that sounds off theologically. And it took me a long time to wrestle with it, but I realized he was right. And here's why he's right. He didn't break this down, but it was like, because he wasn't into the theology part of it. And I was just, oh yeah, this is going to seem really obvious to you guys. It was not obvious to me. It was really obvious. Characters are not people. They're not even really representations of people. So the main character in the book in a book or in a film, is going to be embodying something that is more idealistic in nature. And that can be positive or it can be negative. It can be something like in Les Mis, you have Jean Valjean, who is an embodiment of mercy, without ever saying, I'm an embodiment of mercy. He's shown mercy and he expresses mercy all through that. And then you have Javert, the police inspector, who is tracking him down for the sake of what? Justice. Right? Who wins? Who triumphs? Mercy triumphs over. But human justice, right? Not God's justice. So if your embodiment of mercy, your embodiment of truth, your embodiment of courage needs to be rescued by Marines, it isn't all that strong of an ideal, is it? If you're embodying truth and you're saying, yeah, truth's not enough on its own, it also needs a bazooka. You're doing the opposite of what the Bible is doing. The Bible is telling us, no, truth on its own is more powerful than a bazooka. Love on its own, nailed to a cross, is more powerful than hatred. It's more powerful. Second thing, good turning points are unexpected and unpredictable. Again, you want to create the idea that you should have seen it coming, but you didn't. You can use misdirection. You can plant the idea of something so the audience feels smart and then not do it. That's legitimate, as long as the thing you do is actually there and they go, oh, yeah, I should have seen that. Good turning points also create meaning and or fulfillment. This is when I mentioned revelation. Revelation can happen. It's just learning something, right? So this can be the character learning something, or it can be the audience learning something, or it can be both. Empire Strikes Back, the most famous line, Darth Vader, after they have their duel and he cuts off Luke's hand, he says, I always get the line wrong. It's something like, what is it? No, Luke, I am your father, right? That's a revelation to Luke, right? It's a revelation to the audience at the same time. I saw it when it came out. I'm old enough to remember people going in the theaters. So both sides, like the one in the story and us outside of the story, we both get the revelation. It can also just happen to the character. In It's a Wonderful Life, we know what's happening way before George Bailey does. It's not until Clarence says to him, you got your wish, you were never born, that he finally goes, oh. He has to actually see Marion, who for some reason, if you can't have George Bailey, she just becomes she becomes an old maid. She's an old maid, yeah. It's kind of funny now, but in hindsight. Or at the end of Cyrano de Bergerac, if you've never read Cyrano de Bergerac, if you've never watched the 1950 film version with, what's his name? What is it? No, that's Roxanne. That's the 1980s version. The 1950 version with Jose Ferrer, I think, is the guy who directed. He was actually like a world-class fencing person, and he was quite an accomplished actor. So black and white, 1950. It's worth watching. I love Cyrano de Bergerac as something to study for story. At the end of that play, Cyrano knows he's dying, and we don't. So when Roxanne in the convent realizes it is when we realize it. Cyrano has known. He went to the convent specifically to say goodbye, in essence, to do the thing that he loved, just being with Roxanne. It's beautiful. Also, this is a complete money trail. I'm a little bit salty about the fact that Cyrano de Bergerac was based on a real story. The real story meaning a love triangle. When Edmond Rostand and his wife were staying on a beach, there was a young man in the beach next to it's not a beach house, in the house that was by the ocean where they were staying. And he really liked this girl, and she just really didn't want anything to do with him. So he started writing love poetry for the guy to give to the girl. That was what gave him the idea for the play, which is also, it's not fair to her, but it's also like, some schlub out there had Edmond Rostand writing his love poetry for him. It just seems wrong, like life isn't fair. I don't know. Also, he was 26 when he penned Cyrano de Bergerac. And when he took it to the best theater in the world was in France, the most famous actors. They read the play and they said, the director said, I have to do this. But it's too long. We need to cut it. And Edmond Rostand said, cut anything you want that you think can be taken out of the play without harming it. And they said, we're not taking out a thing. They couldn't find anything to take out of it. That's a lesson, I think. Again, I put my finger out. I'm not wagging my finger. I mean, for us as artists, that's a lesson. If it can be cut, cut it out. If it can't be cut, don't cut it out. All right, here's a way to think about this. This comes from Deborah Chester's book, which has an odd title that sounds terrible. It's really a good book. I read a lot of books on story. It's called The Fantasy Fiction Formula. And I love this because it's such a simple way to get across the same sort of concept. Ask yourself the question, does your hero succeed in this scene? And the answer is always going to be one of the first three until the end of the story. So it's either no, or no and furthermore, or it's yes, but. So does Katniss Everdeen avoid going to the Hunger Games when the name is drawn? Yes, but. Yes, but. Primrose does not. That pushes us into the next scene. What's the next scene? The dilemma. Does she get what she wants? Does she keep Primrose from getting into the Hunger Games? Yes, but she has to go in her stead. Does this make sense? Simple, simple. And this can be really effective if you already have a screenplay. It can be painful too. If you go through and you cannot answer this, you don't know, then odds are, if each of these 24 to 32 sections in your screenplay, if you're not able to say no, no and furthermore, or yes but, then odds are you need to do something. And the thing you might need to do might be really small, might not be huge, might be simple. Here's one thing that you might need to do. I have 8 minutes, is that right? Is that correct? Okay. So, anybody ever see The Quiet Man with John Wayne, the big 30-minute brawl they have at the end? I did not understand that movie as a kid. I understand it a little bit better as an adult. I still think the fight goes on way too long in the end. It's not believable. I don't think it's supposed to be believable. But let me just present to you the classic Western fight between the black-hatted character and the white-hatted character, and they're in the brawl. And the saloon brawl always starts out with fist fight, at least back in the 50s. Fisticuffs, then chairs being broken over somebody's head, and then chandeliers coming down, and then a knife out of the boot, and then somebody breaks a bottle, and then there's gunfire, and then that's not a real gun, like this, you know. Are we entertained yet? I mean, some of the action is kind of entertaining, right? But let's say we're in the middle of that story, and we've got the thing going back and forth, and finally one of them has the other one at the bar, bruised and bloody, and he's got a knife in his throat. And the saloon doors swing open, and there's a little 8-year-old girl in a blueprint dress standing there, and she says, "Daddy?" Guess what? Drama just walked into that saloon, right? Does it matter which one is her daddy? Drama is right there. Sometimes what we need is not a simple conflict. We need a clash between opposing forces that is made complex by the perspective of something outside of it. This can be a way if you're struggling with, well, I've got conflict in my scenes, yes, but do you have perspective on that conflict? You have a third element. It's not always the answer, but it's one of the most common things. And I'd like to show you from Lord of the Rings 2 different ways that Tolkien brings a third element. So we have Frodo versus the ring. Frodo's internal conflict. The ring is wearing him down. He says the ring, it's getting heavier, right? As he gets closer, the ring is getting heavier and heavier. And he's starting to just do this, look at it, and love it, right? Everybody in this room has a ring that you sometimes, sorry to be rude, I'm part of everybody in this room, right? That's Tolkien saying something about the nature of evil, right? It's attractive. Something about it that pulls to us. Jesus said, he, meaning the devil, has no place in me. I think he's probably the only person since Adam and Eve who's been able to say he has no place in me. Right? So, Frodo versus the ring. And Frodo is amazing that he makes it all the way to Mount Doom before the ring gets him holy. But what do we have that adds a third element to this? We have Gollum. He's as a person, right? Imagine how boring this conflict would be without Gollum. It knows, precious, right? I mean, the things that it says to him take on new meaning, right? We start to go, wow. And we start to go, wait a minute, Frodo's becoming Gollum. This is what he's going to become. It shows us the path in advance. This is the choice. It's starting to show the dilemma. Picture it for us. So Gollum's a reflection of Frodo and the ring, both at the same time. Does this make sense? That's what that third element is doing there. But he also acts as an obstacle to Frodo's external conflict. He gets in the way, right? You can think of times probably without me saying them because we're running out of time. He gets in the way. Then we have Frodo versus Sauron, the external opponent, right? What third element does Tolkien add to that journey? He adds Samwise Gamgee. Without Sam, the journey to Mordor would be boring as well. It would just be physical obstacles. Sam is an external reflection, reminding us why the ring needs to be destroyed. He's helping us remember the Shire. He's helping us remember Frodo's hobbitishness. There's an interesting anecdote from the Inklings where C.S. Lewis, who, you may not know this, but C.S. Lewis is Treebeard. That's who the character was fashioned after C.S. Lewis. Really, his voice and everything, like Tolkien was like, no, that's Lewis. That's him. Lewis is probably the reason we have Lord of the Rings, because he kept urging Tolkien to continue writing it. And he would also say things at their meetings like, Tullers, hobbits are only interesting when they are doing unhobbit-like things. We do not need more hobbit parties in this book. Sam's also pulling him back internally towards his hobbitishness. And without Sam, Frodo probably would have given in to the ring sooner. Probably, right? So those two people, Sam and Gollum, act as third elements of conflict that create a much more dynamic story and a much more interesting person. You can combine these patterns into a single scene, and you can do this with disasters followed by dilemmas or dilemmas followed by disasters, meaning you use the same structures, but you only have one turning point. So you have something that goes from positive to negative, but it takes a disaster and a dilemma to make that happen, or vice versa. So just because I call something a scene, a dilemma, or a disaster, doesn't mean it has to take a lot of time. And you can see things that are really effective where they're like layering. They might have a disaster, a dilemma, and a disaster in one scene. It gets harder to do if you stack them because they can lose their emotional effectiveness. It's hard to react emotionally more than once in a scene. Deeply, is what I mean. Does this make sense? Okay. You can also do it. Yeah, so last slide here. One simple way to encapsulate everything I'm saying. Ask yourself, what do my characters want? What is in the way? Do they succeed? What goes wrong, or what terrible choice must be made, and what changes as a result? Those 5 questions. Ask yourself about your scenes. And if you have a good answer for each of them, and it's actually in your scene, chances are they're working. Okay, I know we only have 10 seconds. We don't have time? Do we have time for questions? No? Okay. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you coming.